Hello, Chariot Rider here, and I run a channel talking about the design and formal structure of games. At the moment, Burger is on vacation, and he asked me if I would like to make a guest video for his channel, and I agreed, which explains why this video exists. So, as I said, my channel is about games, and they will be the focus of today's video. Specifically, I want to take this time to talk about the history and design of a very specific kind of game, Eurogames. Before I begin, I just wanted to mention that I'm getting over a very slight cold, so if my voice sounds a bit off, that's probably why. Without further ado, let's begin. Before talking about the history and formation of the Eurogame genre, we first need to understand what a Eurogame is and what makes them so special among the gaming landscape. So what is a Eurogame? While a universal definition of Eurogames doesn't really exist, there are some common traits that are commonly pointed to as the defining traits of Eurogames. Taking a look at these traits will give us a good understanding of what I mean when I say Eurogame. One of the most important traits of a Eurogame is the general lack of direct conflict in favor of a more indirect form of conflict. Combat is rarely featured in a Eurogame, and when it is, the combat is usually heavily abstracted or a small part of the game system as a whole. Another trait that partially exists as a result of the previous trait is lack of player elimination. All players will remain in play for the entirety of the game, which ensures that unlike American-style games, players will not need to sit around watching their friends have a good time without them if they happen to get eliminated early on, like they would in Risk or Monopoly. Eurogames tend to minimize their use of randomness, which again separates it from the majority of American-style tabletop games, which oftentimes rely on the use of dice or cards to resolve a conflict. The final distinctive trait of a Eurogame is the focus on mechanics over the themes. Rarely will a Eurogame ever include a mechanic just because of its theme. A Eurogame might try to justify its mechanics through its theme as much as possible, but at the end of the day, if the game needs to include a mechanic that doesn't entirely fit the theme, the designer will not hesitate to include it, if it makes the game more mechanically interesting. Some people would argue that there are more defining traits of Eurogames, while others would argue that there are less. These traits are what I consider to be the most important to Eurogame design. Now that we have a better understanding of what a Eurogame is, we can better understand the historical significance of the emergence of the Eurogame genre, and how that genre came to be. Contrary to what the name suggests, the Eurogame usually doesn't refer to the design of European games as a whole, but rather a style of board game that originated in Germany specifically. In fact, some writers don't refer to Eurogames as Eurogames, but instead call them German-style board games, or simply German games. No matter what you call them, Eurogames are associated with Germany more than any other country. In fact, you could say that Germany is to board games what Japan is to video games. Namely, they are very important and are the inspiration for countless game designers around the world, who have popularized the foreign designs in their home countries. But there is one question I would like to ask. Specifically, what is it about Germany that led them to be the pioneers of the Eurogame? This is quite a complicated question, but answering it should help us understand the formation of Eurogames. We can trace German fascination with board games back to the German toy industry, which goes all the way back to the 14th century, and eventually established Nuremberg as the toy capital of the world. With such a focus on toy production, this naturally led some companies to explore tabletop games as a branch of the toy industry. One of the earliest German game companies was founded by Otto Robert Meyer, who published A Trip Around the World in 1844. After this success, Meyer sold his bookstore and founded Ravensburger, which would be one of the major early German game publishers. However, Germany could not focus on play forever, because in 1914, World War I began, and many of the factories that were producing toys were converted to produce weapons of war. Though Germany would recover slightly after the war, its ability to produce playthings was greatly diminished because of the Great Depression, foreign boycotts on German goods, and the rise of the National Socialist Party, which drove many Jewish manufacturers out of the country. World War II would go on to have a significant impact on the way German games are designed. In the years following World War II, Germany would become very strict when it came to the depiction of violence in media. This censorship would be carried out by the Federal Department for Media Harmful to Young Persons, which was first established in 1954, and restricted distribution of content that glorified war or trivialized violence. This has forced many foreign games to make alterations in order to be published in Germany. In the American version of the game Risk, players fight to conquer each other until one person remains, but in the German version, players fight to liberate their opponent's territories. There are countless other games, both tabletop and digital, with similar stories reflecting the growing anti-militaristic taboo in Germany. Since violence is such a cultural taboo in Germany, many of the designers in Germany began exploring other themes of games that weren't as focused on violent conflicts like many of the American and United Kingdom games. Because of this, many German games featured gameplay centered around exploring, building, trading, and other forms of non-violent conflict. As I mentioned earlier, this is one of the defining features of a Eurogame, and this is how it got its start. Many would say that 1964 was the year where the first Eurogame was released, though it was not called a Eurogame at the time. Interestingly, this game was not initially released in Germany, but came from an American designer, Sid Saxon. This game was Acquire, which was published by 3M Games as a part of their Bookshelf Games series. Acquire had all the hallmarks that we now associate with Eurogames, and the game's promotion in Germany through German newspaper Die Zeit ensured that Acquire had a significant impact on the German style of game that would emerge over the following years. It is also important to bring up the Spiel des Jahres, which is the most prestigious board gaming award in the world. The Spiel des Jahres was established in 1979 and was created to pressure and encourage German game publishers to produce higher quality games. The award judges the games on their game concept, rule structure, layout, and design. While Acquire was on the shortlist, the very first Spiel des Jahres was awarded to Haas und Ingel from British designer David Parlett. In the following years, the Spiel des Jahres has expanded, introducing new awards such as the Kinderspiel des Jahres, which is awarded to the best kids game of the year, and the Kennerspiel des Jahres, which is reserved for the larger, more complex games. Games that win the Spiel des Jahres can expect a significant boost in sales and popularity. The Eurogame as we know it was beginning to take form. Throughout the 1980s, several classic games were produced, and many of the most famous German designers began making names for themselves. Notable among these are Rainer Knizia, Klaus Teuber, Wolfgang Kramer, and many more. At this time period, though, the Eurogame movement was mostly isolated to Germany, with no official way for fans in other countries to acquire English versions of these games. That wouldn't stop the dedicated fans from across the world who had grown tired of the American board game industry at the time. Publishers like Avalon Hill were mostly focused on rules-heavy, complicated, long, historically accurate war games. Or publishers like Parker Brothers, who focused on repackaging the same games to fit a new licensed IP, and occasionally publish an original yet bland game. I guess some things never change. Either way, a small but dedicated group of players began traveling to Germany to acquire German board games, writing fan magazines with game reviews, and creating translated versions of the rules for people in other countries to use. This grassroots effort to bring board games back to the States was small at first, but slowly, German games would start coming over to the United States in more official forms. Perhaps the game most responsible for the mass migration of German game releases in the rest of the world was Catan from Klaus Teuber. Released in 1995, Catan from Cosmos Games was massively successful in its home country. A year later, Mayfair Games acquired the rights to publish Catan in English. Catan would turn out to be a huge success in the States, and would sell 25 million copies worldwide by 2011, introducing millions of players to the Eurogame style, and showing publishers that there was indeed a market for more advanced board games in the States. This encouraged publishers to bring over other Eurogames from Germany, such as Carcassonne or Agricola. Eventually, these games started showing up in stores like Target, being sold alongside more well-known games like Risk and Monopoly. One disclaimer I should mention before wrapping up this video is that while board games are very popular in Germany, I don't want to give you the impression that absolutely everyone in the country regularly plays these sorts of games all the time. In fact, many don't go beyond the typical board game staples that Americans play. That said, the German public is much more aware of the German board gaming hobby scene than other countries, and, on the whole, they tend to play these games much more regularly. In fact, Germany buys more board games per capita than any other country. A quote from Moritz Egert summarizes this point well. Many families see gaming as a good activity to do with their kids, instead of hanging around and watching TV. This is why good family games are always in demand in Germany. It is also seen as an easy social activity which brings together different ages, grandma, mother, dad, and son, for example. Most families I know own a certain canon of games, and even people who aren't really geeks know about the Game of the Year, for example. And some will simply buy it because it says Game of the Year on the box, even though they don't otherwise buy games. My point in mentioning this is that if you're picturing Germany as some sort of board game utopia, perhaps that is not the most accurate description of Germany you could have. If you've never played a Eurogame before, I highly recommend checking them out. Some personal suggestions for games I like include the Castles of Mad King Ludwig, Carcassonne, and Lost Cities are all excellent Eurogames. Eurogames as a whole represent some of the finest experiences that board games can offer. The American board game has made many huge advancements in recent years, and many of these advancements in design were partially influenced by adopting some of the traits found in Eurogames. This video does not dive into every minute detail I could have gone into, but I hope this video shows that art is inspired by the culture in which it is created, and then that culture is influenced by its art, in a constant cycle of influence and inspiration. If you have enjoyed this video, I would recommend checking out my own channel, which dives a bit more into the mechanical design of game systems. Anyway, this has been Chariot Rider. Have a good day.